I walked into my kitchen that Tuesday morning expecting nothing more than coffee and silence. But instead, I found a certified letter on my counter that made my blood run cold. The heading read, "Notice of Property Seizure" in bold letters, and beneath it was the signature of Deborah Winters, president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association in Scottsdale, Arizona. My name is Frank Lancaster, and I had just inherited my late uncle's estate 6 months prior. The property was a sprawling 5-acre compound with a main house, guest house, and what used to be stables converted into a workshop. My Uncle Gerald had been a successful software engineer who retired early and poured his money into this property back in 2018. When he passed away from a heart attack in November, I was his only living relative, so everything went to me. I had moved from Seattle to Arizona to take over the estate, planning to continue my remote work as a financial analyst from this beautiful property. The letter claimed that the HOA board had voted unanimously to seize my property due to extensive and willful violations of community standards, failure to pay assessments, and disregard for architectural guidelines. I read through the document 3 times, my hands shaking with each pass. According to Deborah's letter, I owed $78,000 in fines and back dues, and since I had allegedly ignored multiple warnings, the board had exercised their contractual right to claim the property as payment. I had never received a single warning. Not one letter, not one email, not one phone call. I paid my HOA dues on time every month through automatic bank transfer. I had made 0 modifications to the property. This had to be a mistake or worse, a deliberate attempt at fraud. I immediately called my title company, Southwestern Title and Escrow, where I had worked with a sharp woman named Patricia Chen during the property transfer. She answered on the second ring. "Patricia, this is Frank Lancaster. I need your help right now. The HOA is trying to take my property." There was a brief pause. "Excuse me. Slow down and tell me exactly what happened." I read her the letter verbatim, including every ridiculous charge. Patricia listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she let out a low whistle. "Frank, I need you to scan that letter and email it to me immediately. Do not respond to the HOA. Do not call them. Do not engage at all. I am going to make some calls and I will get back to you within 2 hours." Can they actually do this? Absolutely not the way they are attempting it. Arizona revised statutes are very clear about HOA powers and limitations. What they are describing is not legal seizure, it is attempted theft. Send me that document now. I hung up and rushed to my home office to scan the letter. My hands fumbled with the scanner lid as adrenaline surged through my system. This property was worth at least $2 million. The main house alone was 4,000 square feet of custom architecture with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the desert landscape. My uncle had put his heart into this place, and I would be damned if some power-hungry HOA president was going to steal it from me. After sending the email to Patricia, I pulled up the HOA documents I had received during the title transfer. The Willow Creek HOA governed a community of 47 homes, most of them on 1 to 2 acre lots. The monthly dues were $350, which I had been paying faithfully. I checked my bank statements and confirmed that every payment had cleared. I had records going back to December, right after I took ownership. My phone rang 90 minutes later. Patricia did not waste time with pleasantries. "Frank, I have been on the phone with my attorney and with the county recorder's office. What Deborah Winters is attempting is not just illegal, it is criminal fraud. According to county records, there are no liens against your property. There are no outstanding assessments. Your title is clean and clear. Furthermore, Arizona law requires that before an HOA can even consider foreclosure, they must provide written notice, an opportunity to cure, and then go through a judicial or non-judicial foreclosure process that takes months and requires court oversight. So this letter is complete garbage. Worse than garbage. It is evidence of attempted real estate fraud. I have already drafted a cease and desist letter, and I am hand-delivering it to Deborah Winters this afternoon. I am also sending copies to every member of the HOA board and CCing it to the county attorney's office. This ends today. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by anger. Why would she do this? What could she possibly gain? That is what we need to find out. In my experience, when someone tries something this brazen, there is usually a financial motive. Do you know anything about Deborah Winters personally? I have never even met her. I have barely interacted with any of my neighbors. I keep to myself and work from home. Okay, sit tight. I will update you after I deliver this letter. In the meantime, document everything. If anyone from the HOA contacts you, do not engage beyond saying that all communication must go through your legal counsel. After we hung up, I could not sit still. I paced through the house, looking out at the property my uncle had loved so much. The desert vegetation was in full bloom despite it being January when he passed. Now, in late May, the landscape was dry but still beautiful, with saguaro cacti standing like sentinels across the property. I had grown to love this place over the past 6 months. The quiet, the space, the stunning sunsets. The idea that someone thought they could just vote to take it away made me furious. I decided to do some research on Deborah Winters. A quick internet search revealed that she was a real estate agent with Desert Dreams Realty. Her professional photo showed a woman in her early 50s with blonde hair styled in a sharp bob, wearing a blazer and a smile that did not reach her eyes. Her bio boasted about her sales record and her commitment to maintaining property values in exclusive communities. That phrase stuck with me. Maintaining property values. I clicked through to her recent sales, and something caught my attention. 3 properties in Willow Creek had sold in the past 4 months, all of them listed by Deborah. I pulled up the details on each sale. 2 of them were standard residential transactions, but the third one made my stomach drop. The property at 847 Desert Vista Road had been sold by the HOA itself, not by an individual owner. The listing described it as a foreclosure sale due to unpaid assessments. The home had sold for far below market value, and Deborah had represented the HOA in the transaction. Her commission would have been substantial even at the reduced price. I grabbed my phone and called Patricia back. I think I know why she is doing this. She has been selling foreclosed HOA properties and collecting commissions. I just found one she sold 3 months ago. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Send me that listing information. If there is a pattern here, we need to document it. This could be much bigger than just your property. I emailed her the links and then sat down to dig deeper. The property at 847 Desert Vista had belonged to an elderly couple according to the previous listing history. I searched for their names and found an obituary. The husband, Richard Morrison, had died 2 years ago. His wife, Margaret, had apparently lived in the home alone until the HOA seized it. This was not right. None of this was right. My doorbell rang, startling me out of my research. I checked the security camera feed on my phone and saw a woman standing on my porch. She was wearing expensive sunglasses and carrying a designer handbag. Even through the camera, I recognized her from her real estate photos. Deborah Winters had come to my home. I opened the door but stayed behind the security screen. "Can I help you?" She smiled, that same empty smile from her photos. Frank Lancaster. I am Deborah Winters, president of the Willow Creek HOA. I wanted to stop by and discuss the notice you received this morning. All communication goes through my legal counsel. Her smile faltered. Now, there is no need to involve lawyers. I am sure we can work something out. The board is willing to reduce the fines if you agree to certain conditions. There are no fines. I have not violated any rules and my HOA dues are current. This is fraud and my title company is already handling it. The smile disappeared entirely. Mr. Lancaster, you need to understand that the HOA has significant power in this community. We have the right to maintain standards, and if homeowners refuse to comply, we have remedies available to us. Your remedies do not include stealing property. Leave my porch before I call the police. Her face hardened into something ugly. You are making a huge mistake. The board voted unanimously. You cannot fight all of us. Watch me. She turned and walked back to her white Mercedes SUV, her heels clicking sharply against the stone pathway. I closed the door and immediately called Patricia again. She just showed up at my house trying to negotiate. I told her to go through you. Good. That was incredibly stupid of her. It shows consciousness of guilt. I am on my way to the HOA management office now. I will call you when I am done. The next few hours were agonizing. I tried to work, but I could not focus on the financial reports I was supposed to be analyzing. Instead, I kept researching Deborah Winters and the Willow Creek HOA. I found the association's public documents filed with the county and started reading through board meeting minutes. What I discovered made me sick. Over the past 3 years, the HOA had foreclosed on 7 properties. 7 homes had been seized and sold, all with Deborah listing them. The meeting minutes were sparse on details, but each foreclosure followed the same pattern. Alleged violations, fines, failure to pay, seizure, sale. I searched for the names of the previous owners and found 3 more obituaries. 2 of the homeowners had been elderly and living alone when their properties were taken. 1 had been a widow, another a divorced man in his 70s. The other 4 properties were harder to trace, but I found court records indicating that 2 of them had been owned by people dealing with serious illnesses. Deborah Winters was targeting vulnerable people. She was weaponizing the HOA to seize properties from people who could not fight back, then selling those properties and pocketing the commissions. I was probably her first target who had the resources and awareness to push back immediately. My phone rang at 5:30. Patricia sounded triumphant. I just left the HOA management office. I met with 4 of the 5 board members. Deborah was not there, conveniently. Frank, they had no idea about this seizure notice. Deborah forged their signatures. What? The board never voted on seizing your property. Deborah created that document herself and forged the other board members' signatures. When I showed them the letter, they were horrified. 2 of them immediately resigned from the board. The other 2 are demanding Deborah's resignation and threatening to press charges. So this is over. For you, yes. Your property is secure, but this is far from over for Deborah. I contacted the county attorney's office and they are very interested in the information you found about the other foreclosures. I think you should call them directly and provide them with your research. She gave me the name and number of an assistant county attorney named James Park. I called immediately and spent the next hour walking him through everything I had found. He listened carefully, asking detailed questions about each property and each transaction. Mr. Lancaster, this is extremely helpful. We have been looking at HOA abuse in the county, but we had not identified this specific pattern. Can you send me all the documentation you have compiled? Absolutely. Should I be worried about retaliation from Deborah? I am going to contact her today and make it very clear that any contact with you or anyone else involved in this matter could result in immediate criminal charges. I would also suggest filing a police report about the fraudulent notice and her showing up at your home." I took his advice and called the Scottsdale Police Department. An officer came to my house that evening and took a detailed report. She photographed the seizure notice and took copies of all my documentation. She also reviewed the security footage of Deborah at my door. "This is definitely something we will investigate," Officer Sarah Mendez told me. "Attempted real estate fraud is a serious felony in Arizona. Combined with the pattern you have identified, this could result in multiple charges. What about the people who already lost their homes? Can they get them back? That will depend on a lot of factors, but the county attorney's office can potentially pursue restitution. If this goes to criminal trial and she is convicted, part of the sentencing could include making the victims whole." After Officer Mendez left, I sat on my back patio and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The peace of the desert landscape contrasted sharply with the chaos of the day. I thought about my Uncle Gerald and how much he had loved this property. He had worked hard his entire life to build something beautiful and lasting. The idea that someone like Deborah Winters thought she could just take it through manipulation and fraud was infuriating. But it was not just about my property. It was about Margaret Morrison and all the other people who had lost their homes because they were vulnerable and alone. They had trusted the HOA to operate fairly, and instead, they had been exploited by someone who saw them as easy targets. The next morning, I received an email from Patricia with an attachment. It was a formal letter from the Willow Creek HOA board, signed by the 3 remaining board members, stating that the seizure notice was fraudulent, that I was in good standing with the association, and that Deborah Winters had been removed from her position as president. They apologized profusely and offered to cover any legal fees I had incurred. I forwarded the email to James Park at the county attorney's office. He responded within an hour, thanking me and letting me know that they were opening a formal investigation. He also mentioned that they had contacted the Arizona Department of Real Estate to investigate Deborah's real estate license. I spent the rest of the week trying to get back to normal, but the story was far from over. On Friday afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Frank Lancaster." The voice was female, older, and hesitant. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Helen Park. I got your number from James Park at the county attorney's office. He is my nephew. He said you might be able to help me." "Help you with what?" "I used to live in Willow Creek. The HOA took my house 2 years ago. James said you found evidence that Deborah Winters was running a fraud scheme. Is that true?" My heart sank. "Yes, it is true. I am so sorry about what happened to you." Helen's voice cracked. "I was caring for my husband. He had Alzheimer's. I fell behind on some HOA payments because all our money was going to his medical care. Deborah told me she would work with me, that I could set up a payment plan. Then one day I got a notice that they were foreclosing. It happened so fast. I lost my home and my husband died 3 months later. I have been living with my daughter ever since." I did not know what to say. The cruelty of what Deborah had done was overwhelming. "Helen, I am going to do everything I can to help. I have been documenting all the properties she took. I am working with the county attorney's office. If there is any way to get justice for you and the others, we will find it. I just want people to know what she did. I do not even care about the money anymore. I just want her to be held accountable." We talked for another 20 minutes. Helen told me about her husband, about the home they had built together, about how devastating it was to lose everything while dealing with his illness. By the time we hung up, I had made a decision. I was not going to let this go. I was going to make sure Deborah Winters faced consequences for every home she had stolen. Over the weekend, I created a detailed timeline of all 7 foreclosures, including dates, amounts allegedly owed, sale prices, and Deborah's commissions. The pattern was clear. In every case, the homeowner was vulnerable, either due to age, illness, or death of a spouse. The alleged debts were always substantial, often including massive fines for minor violations. The foreclosures happened quickly, without the proper legal processes. And every single property was listed and sold by Deborah, generating commissions totaling over $300,000. On Monday morning, I sent the complete timeline to James Park, Patricia Chen, and Officer Mendez. I also sent a copy to the Arizona Attorney General's office and to a local investigative journalist I had found who specialized in real estate fraud. The journalist, Marcus Webb, called me that afternoon. "Mr. Lancaster, this is explosive. I have been covering HOA abuse for 5 years, and this is one of the most blatant fraud schemes I have ever seen. Would you be willing to go on record?" "Absolutely. But I want the focus to be on the victims, not on me. My property was never actually taken. People like Helen Park who lost everything, they are the real story." "Agreed. I would like to interview you and Helen if she is willing. I am also going to track down the other victims. This is going to be a major story." Marcus worked fast. By Wednesday, he had interviewed 4 of the 7 victims or their families. One of the foreclosed homeowners, an elderly man named Robert Chen, was still alive and living in a nursing home. His daughter told Marcus that the stress of losing his home had accelerated his dementia. On Thursday, Marcus published his article in the Arizona Republic. The headline read, "Scottsdale HOA President Accused of Orchestrating Foreclosure Fraud Scheme Targeting Vulnerable Homeowners." The article was devastating, laying out the entire pattern with extensive documentation. Marcus had obtained copies of the forged board votes, the inflated fine schedules, and interviews with multiple victims. The response was immediate and intense. The story was picked up by local TV stations, then by national news outlets. By Friday, there were reporters camped outside Deborah's house and outside the Willow Creek community gates. The Arizona Department of Real Estate announced they were suspending her license pending investigation. Desert Dreams Realty fired her and issued a statement claiming they had no knowledge of her actions. I watched the news coverage from my living room, feeling a mix of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction that Deborah was being held accountable, but sadness for all the people who had lost their homes and could never fully recover what was taken from them. On Monday of the following week, James Park called me with an update. "We are filing criminal charges. Deborah Winters is being charged with 7 counts of fraud, 7 counts of forgery, theft, and exploitation of a vulnerable adult. If convicted on all counts, she is looking at significant prison time." What about restitution for the victims? That is part of the criminal case. We are also working with the victims to potentially unwind some of the property sales. It is complicated because some of the homes have been resold to innocent third parties, but in at least 3 cases, the properties are still owned by the people who bought them in the fraudulent foreclosure sales. We might be able to force those sales to be reversed. And what about the HOA itself? Are they liable? That is going to be a civil matter. The victims could potentially sue the HOA for allowing this to happen. But from what we can tell, Deborah was operating mostly on her own. She was forging board approvals and manipulating the system. The HOA was negligent in their oversight, but they might not be criminally liable. 2 weeks later, Deborah Winters was arrested at her home. The local news showed footage of her being led out in handcuffs, her face hidden behind her hands. She posted bail but was ordered to surrender her passport and remain in Arizona pending trial. I was contacted by attorneys representing Helen Park and 2 other victims. They were filing a civil lawsuit against Deborah, the Willow Creek HOA, and Desert Dreams Realty. They asked if I would be willing to testify about what I had discovered and about Deborah's attempt to seize my property. I agreed immediately. The civil case moved forward while the criminal case was being prepared. During this time, I got to know several of the victims and their families. Helen Park became a friend. We would meet for coffee every couple of weeks, and she would tell me stories about her husband and her life before Deborah destroyed it. She was remarkably resilient, but the pain of what she had lost was always just beneath the surface. You know what hurts the most? She told me one afternoon as we sat at a cafe in downtown Scottsdale. It is not even the house itself, though I loved that house. It is the feeling that someone saw me at my weakest moment and decided to take advantage of that. When my husband was sick, I was so vulnerable and scared. And Deborah looked at that situation and saw an opportunity to make money. She's going to pay for what she did. I hope so. But even if she goes to prison, it does not give me back those years. It does not change the fact that I lost my home while I was trying to care for the man I loved. The criminal trial began in early September, about 4 months after Deborah's attempted seizure of my property. I was called as a witness for the prosecution. Walking into the courthouse, I felt the weight of what this case represented. It was not just about one woman's greed. It was about the abuse of power, about targeting the vulnerable, about the failure of systems that were supposed to protect homeowners. The prosecutor, an intense woman named Rachel Diaz, walked me through my testimony methodically. I explained how I had inherited the property, how I had received the fraudulent seizure notice, how my title company had discovered it was all fabricated. I showed the jury the forged documents, my bank records proving I had paid all my HOA dues, and the county records showing my clean title. "Mr. Lancaster," Rachel asked me, "what was your reaction when you realized Miss Winters had attempted to seize your property through fraud?" I was terrified at first. This was my home, my inheritance from my uncle. The idea that someone could just take it was horrifying. But then I was angry. And when I started researching and found out about the other properties she had taken, I was disgusted. She was targeting people who could not fight back. Deborah's attorney, a slick defense lawyer named Kenneth Ross, tried to shake my testimony on cross-examination. "Mr. Lancaster, isn't it true that you never actually met my client before this alleged incident?" "That is correct." "So you have no personal knowledge of her intent, do you?" "I have the forged documents. I have the pattern of behavior. I have the evidence of 7 other properties she seized through the same fraudulent process." "Objection, speculation," Kenneth said quickly. "Sustained," the judge ruled. "The jury will disregard that last statement, but the damage was done. The jury had heard about the pattern." And over the next 3 weeks of trial, Rachel systematically proved every element of that pattern. She brought in Helen Park, who testified about losing her home while caring for her dying husband. She brought in Robert Chen's daughter, who described how her father's dementia accelerated after he lost the home he had lived in for 30 years. She brought in documents, emails, forged signatures, bank records showing Deborah's commissions, everything. The most damning testimony came from one of the former HOA board members, a man named Thomas Wright. He testified that Deborah had complete control over the board, that she presented them with documents to sign without fully explaining what they were approving, and that she often made decisions without board approval and then created retroactive documentation. Did Miss Winters ever discuss with you the foreclosure of Frank Lancaster's property? Rachel asked him. No, never. I had no idea she was attempting to seize his home until his attorney showed up at our meeting. When I saw that letter with my forged signature, I was shocked. I resigned from the board that day. Why did you resign? Because I realized I had been part of a system that was harming people. Even though I did not know what Deborah was doing, I should have been paying closer attention. I should have questioned her more. People lost their homes, and I was supposed to be providing oversight. I failed in that responsibility. The trial lasted nearly 4 weeks. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned with their verdict, I was sitting in the courtroom along with Helen Park and several other victims and their families. On the count of fraud in the first degree, how do you find the defendant guilty? That word, repeated 7 times for each victim, felt like vindication. Deborah sat at the defense table, her face pale and expressionless. The jury found her guilty on all counts: 7 counts of fraud, 7 counts of forgery, 7 counts of theft, and 3 counts of exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Sentencing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. In the meantime, the civil case moved forward. The HOA's insurance company ended up settling with the victims for a substantial amount, though no amount of money could truly compensate for what had been taken from them. 3 of the properties were successfully recovered through legal action, including Helen Park's home. I went with Helen the day she got the keys back to her house. She stood in the driveway, staring at the familiar facade with tears streaming down her face. I never thought I would see this place again, she said. Tom died without ever knowing if we would get justice. I wish he could be here to see this. He knows, I told her, and he would be proud of you for fighting. The sentencing hearing in late October was packed. Every victim who was able to attend was there. The judge, a stern woman named Margaret Sullivan, listened to impact statements from each victim or their family members. Helen spoke about losing her home and her husband. Robert Chen's daughter spoke about her father's decline. The families of victims who had since passed away spoke on their behalf. When it was Deborah's turn to speak, she stood and read from a prepared statement. She apologized, claimed she had made mistakes but never intended to hurt anyone, and asked for leniency. It rang hollow after weeks of evidence showing her deliberate, calculated fraud. Judge Sullivan was not moved. Miss Winters, you held a position of trust in your community. You were elected to serve and protect homeowners, not to exploit them. You identified vulnerable people, people who were elderly, sick, or grieving, and you systematically defrauded them out of their homes. You forged documents, you lied, you manipulated the legal system, all for personal financial gain. The harm you have caused is immeasurable. These victims lost not just property, but security, stability, and in some cases, their health and well-being deteriorated as a direct result of your actions. She sentenced Deborah to 12 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 8 years. She also ordered full restitution to all victims, though she acknowledged that Deborah likely did not have the assets to fully compensate them. The HOA settlement would help with that. As Deborah was led away in handcuffs, I looked at Helen. She was crying, but she was also smiling. "It is really over," she said. "It is really over." In the months that followed, life slowly returned to normal. Helen moved back into her home and began the process of making it feel like hers again. The other recovered properties were returned to their rightful owners. The Willow Creek HOA underwent a complete restructuring, with new board members, new management, and new oversight procedures to prevent anything like this from ever happening again. I stayed in my uncle's estate, working remotely and enjoying the peace of the desert. The property felt even more precious now, knowing how close I had come to losing it. But more than that, I felt a connection to the community that I had not felt before. Helen and I remained close friends. I got to know other neighbors who had been horrified by what Deborah had done. We formed a kind of informal support group, people who had been affected by her fraud either directly or indirectly. One evening in December, almost exactly a year after I had inherited the property, I hosted a dinner party at the estate. Helen came, along with several other former victims and their families, and some of my neighbors who had supported us through everything. We gathered on the back patio as the sun set over the desert, turning the sky those magnificent shades of orange and purple that I had grown to love. Thomas Wright, the former board member, raised his glass. I want to propose a toast to Frank for refusing to be a victim, to Patricia and the legal team for fighting for what was right, and most of all to the people who lost their homes but never gave up hope for justice. You all showed incredible strength. We clinked glasses and drank. The conversation flowed easily, people sharing stories and laughter. It struck me how much had changed in just 1 year. I had moved to Arizona expecting a quiet life managing my inheritance. Instead, I had stumbled into a fight against corruption and fraud, and in the process, I had found a community. Later that evening, after most of the guests had left, Helen and I sat together looking at the stars. The desert sky was brilliant, unpolluted by city lights. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what? For not giving up. When you got that letter, you could have just hired a lawyer to protect yourself and walked away, but you fought for all of us. You made sure the story got told. You gave us a chance at justice. I could not walk away. Not after I learned what she had done to you and the others. That is because you are a good person. The world needs more people like you." I did not know what to say to that. I had just done what seemed right. But looking around at the property my uncle had built, at the community that had come together to fight injustice, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The legal fallout continued for months after that. Deborah's real estate license was permanently revoked. Desert Dreams Realty faced a separate lawsuit and eventually settled, admitting they had failed in their oversight of her activities. The Arizona legislature even passed new laws regulating HOA foreclosure procedures, partly in response to the publicity around this case. I testified before a state legislative committee about my experience and about the broader issues with HOA governance. Standing in the Capitol building in Phoenix, telling my story to lawmakers, I realized how much this experience had changed me. I had gone from being a passive inheritor of property to being an active advocate for reform and justice. In February, I received a letter from the Arizona Attorney General's office. They were launching a statewide investigation into HOA foreclosure practices, and they wanted to use the Deborah Winters case as a model for what to look for. They asked if I would serve as a consultant, helping them identify red flags and patterns of abuse. I agreed, and over the next several months, I worked with investigators across Arizona. We found dozens of cases of questionable HOA foreclosures, though none as blatant as Deborah's scheme. Many were resolved through negotiation and mediation. A few resulted in additional criminal charges. The work was challenging but deeply satisfying. Through all of this, I maintained my day job as a financial analyst, working from my home office with the desert view. But my real passion had become advocacy work. I started writing articles about HOA reform, speaking at community meetings and advising other homeowners who felt they were being targeted by aggressive HOA boards. In April, the second anniversary of receiving that fraudulent seizure notice, I stood in my kitchen with my morning coffee and reflected on everything that had happened. The certified letter that had terrified me so much was now framed in my office, a reminder of how quickly things can change and how important it is to fight back against injustice. My phone rang. It was Helen. "Good morning. I am calling to remind you that we have the community meeting tonight." "You are still planning to speak, right?" "Absolutely. I have my presentation ready." "Good. People need to hear your story. Knowledge is power, Frank. The more homeowners understand their rights, the harder it is for people like Deborah to take advantage of them." That evening, I stood before a packed community center and told my story once again. The audience was filled with homeowners from across Scottsdale, many of them elderly, many of them concerned about their own HOAs. I walked them through what had happened, how I had fought back, and most importantly, what rights they had. "Your HOA is supposed to serve you, not rule over you," I told them. "They have specific powers granted by law, but those powers are limited. They cannot seize your property without following strict legal procedures. They cannot fine you without proper notice and an opportunity to be heard. They cannot forge documents or lie about board votes, and if they do any of those things, you have remedies available." After the presentation, people lined up to talk to me. Some shared their own horror stories about HOA abuse. Others just wanted to thank me for speaking out. One elderly woman grabbed my hand with tears in her eyes. "My HOA has been threatening me over my landscaping. They say I owe $12,000 in fines. I have been so scared that I would lose my home. But after hearing your story, I realize I need to fight back." "Get everything in writing," I told her. "Document every communication, and contact an attorney who specializes in HOA law. Do not let them intimidate you." She left with a determined look on her face, and I felt that same satisfaction I had felt when the jury convicted Deborah. This was about more than one fraud scheme. It was about empowering people to stand up for their rights. As summer approached, bringing with it the intense Arizona heat, I found myself settling into a new normal. The estate was truly my home now, not just my uncle's place that I was occupying. I had made my own changes and improvements, always carefully following proper HOA procedures and getting written approvals for everything. The new Willow Creek board was reasonable and responsive, a stark contrast to the Deborah Winters regime. In June, I got an unexpected call from a television producer in Los Angeles. They wanted to do a documentary about HOA abuse, and they wanted my case to be the centerpiece. After discussing it with Helen and the other victims, we agreed. The documentary team spent 2 weeks in Arizona, interviewing everyone involved and filming at various locations, including my estate. The documentary premiered on a major streaming platform in September. It was called The HOA Nightmare: How One Woman Stole 7 Homes. The response was overwhelming. Millions of people watched it in the first week. I received hundreds of emails and messages from people sharing their own HOA horror stories or asking for advice. The documentary led to more speaking engagements, more consulting work, and eventually to a book deal. A publisher wanted me to write about my experience and about HOA reform more broadly. I spent months researching and writing, interviewing experts, reviewing case law, and compiling resources for homeowners. The book, which I titled The HOA Trap: How to Protect Your Property Rights, was published the following spring, about 3 years after that terrifying morning when I found the seizure notice. It became a bestseller in the home and real estate category. I donated a portion of the proceeds to a legal aid fund that helped homeowners fight abusive HOAs. Through all of this, Helen remained my closest friend and strongest supporter. She often joked that Deborah's attempt to steal my property was the best thing that ever happened to the HOA reform movement. If she had succeeded in scaring you away, Helen told me one day, she probably would have kept going. She might have stolen a dozen more homes. But you fought back, and in doing so, you saved countless other people from becoming victims. We fought back, I corrected her. This was never just about me. As I sit here now in my home office, looking out at the desert landscape that has become so familiar and beloved, I think about how much my life changed because of one fraudulent letter. I came to Arizona expecting a quiet life of remote work and solitude. Instead, I found purpose, community, and a cause worth fighting for. Deborah Winters is serving her 12-year sentence in an Arizona state prison. She will not be eligible for parole for another 5 years. Her real estate career is over. Her reputation is destroyed. And most importantly, the people she victimized received some measure of justice. But the work continues. HOA abuse is still rampant across the country. Too many people still live in fear of their homeowners associations. Too many boards operate with insufficient oversight. Too many vulnerable people are targeted by those who see them as easy marks. I continue to advocate for reform, to educate homeowners about their rights, and to push for stronger legal protections. Every time I hear from someone who used the information from my book or my speeches to successfully fight back against their HOA, I feel that same sense of purpose I felt the day I decided to investigate Deborah's scheme instead of just protecting myself. My Uncle Gerald built this estate as a legacy, as a place of beauty and peace. He could not have known that it would become the center of a fight for justice, or that his nephew would use it as a base for advocacy work. But I like to think he would be proud. He was always a fighter, always someone who stood up for what was right. The sun is setting now, painting the sky in those magnificent colors that never get old. Helen is coming over for dinner, along with a few other friends from the community. We will sit on the patio, share a meal, tell stories, and enjoy the peace that comes from knowing we fought for justice, and won. That fraudulent seizure notice still hangs framed in my office, a reminder of how quickly everything can change. But next to it now hangs something else, a proclamation from the Arizona State Legislature, recognizing the HOA reform efforts that came out of this case. It is a reminder that even out of the worst situations, good things can emerge if people are willing to fight for them. My phone buzzes with a new email. It is from a homeowner in Florida who just watched the documentary and wants advice about fighting her HOA. I smile and start typing a response. The work never stops, but I would not have it any other way. This is my purpose now, my legacy that extends beyond just protecting one estate in the Arizona desert. I hear Helen's car pulling into the driveway. I save the email draft to finish later and head to the kitchen to start preparing dinner. Life is good. Justice was served. The property is secure. And every day, I wake up grateful for that morning when I walked into my kitchen and found a fraudulent letter that changed everything. Because that letter, meant to steal my home, instead gave me something far more valuable. A purpose, a community, and the satisfaction of knowing that I helped protect others from becoming victims. The desert evening is perfect, and my home is filled with friends who became family through shared struggle and triumph. Deborah Winters tried to take my estate through a board vote. My title company shut that down in a day. But what came after that day shaped the rest of my life in ways I could never have imagined. And for that unexpected journey, despite all its challenges and pain, I am ultimately grateful.